Looking back on that hot afternoon, you and I can probably agree that some men are entirely blinded by their own small authority. "Hand over the keys to this gate right now," he demanded. When I calmly told him this was my private land, he told me to shut up, claiming his sister said my disgusting ranch was done. He threatened to drag me out and cuff me. I told him I just wanted to be left alone, but he mocked me, claiming my cattle stank up her neighborhood. He warned me that 3 other families had tried that and told me to ask how it ended. He was a deputy sheriff doing his homeowners association president's sister's dirty work, absolutely certain I would fold just like the others did. He had absolutely no clue that I had spent 22 years locking up corrupt men just like him in federal prison. On top of that, every single word that poured out of his mouth was already being recorded on a hidden camera. Truth be told, I never actually planned on returning to Gillespie County. Nobody expects to bury their beloved wife when she is only 46, and then drive 4 hours west with a truck packed full of cardboard boxes, heading toward a completely empty ranch house. But that is exactly what happened to me. Elaine was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer on a Monday, and by Friday, I had submitted my retirement papers to the Bureau. 22 years of fighting corruption ended just like that. 11 months after that devastating diagnosis, my sweet Elaine was gone. I was 48, with no children, and our apartment in San Antonio smelled like sterile hospital sheets, no matter how much I washed them. My grandfather had left me 86 acres in the Texas Hill Country. I drove out, repaired 300 yards of rusted fence, bought 40 Hereford cattle, and hoped for a quiet life. But during my 3rd week, a white Cadillac Escalade pulled up, and Tammy Bridwell stepped out. Wearing a linen blazer, yoga pants, and Gucci sunglasses pushed up like a crown, she carried a clipboard and wore a plastic smile that immediately put my investigator instincts on high alert. She walked right up to me and announced that we needed to talk about my property. I soon learned she was the president of the Stone Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, which consisted of 127 Mediterranean-style houses her husband Garrett had built on the old farmland just south of my fence. Tammy ran that place like a small country, fining residents if their grass grew over 3 inches, and measuring mailbox heights with a tape measure. Now this woman was standing on my own gravel driveway, declaring that my ranch was an eyesore, my cattle were smelly, and my steel fence looked industrial. To top it off, she demanded a key to my front gate for inspections. I calmly informed her that my ranch had been here 40 years before her subdivision was even conceived, that I was not a member of her homeowners association, and that absolutely no one entered my land without my permission. She just tilted her head and smiled at me as if I were a naive child, uttering a chilly warning that everyone answers to someone. Later that evening, my 74-year-old neighbor, Hank Kohler, came over to talk. Leaning against the fence with a cold beer, Hank spoke in a hushed voice, warning me that 3 local families, the Petersons, the Crawfords, and Old Dutch Meyer, had already been driven out by Tammy filing endless complaints until they drowned. According to Hank, her brother Wade, a local deputy sheriff and the biggest bully in Gillespie County, would show up with his badge to pressure the target. Soon after, her husband Garrett would call with a lowball offer to buy the land. Standing there in the fading light, looking at the live oak trees, I realized this was the exact same playbook I had seen countless times in my federal career. Badge intimidation, followed by a quiet, coerced real estate deal. 2 days after Tammy's visit, the harassment officially started. A certified letter arrived with an official homeowners association seal, listing 4 absurd infractions, including my cattle supposedly producing hazardous waste. They accused my fence of exceeding neighborhood height standards, claimed my ranch truck was an unauthorized commercial vehicle on a shared road, and, my personal favorite, cited me for unauthorized business activity because of my 3 beehives and the honey I sold at the local farmers market. There were 4 violations in total, but they had absolutely zero jurisdiction over me. My ranch was never part of their subdivision. Yet, the letter was drafted like an official court summons, complete with a 14-day deadline and threats of legal action. I sat at my kitchen table, quietly reading over their hollow threats, smelling the fresh hay and the strong black coffee I had brewed. Part of me wanted to ignore the letter, but then I remembered the local families they had already broken. I chose to fight back. I drafted a formal response, attaching my grandfather's 1978 deed and a county survey, proving my fence sat 14 feet inside my actual property line. I cited the Texas Property Code, which clearly states homeowners association covenants only bind properties within their recorded plat, and sent it via certified mail. I filed my copy in a new folder labeled Bridwell. Of course, they did not stop. That same week, 3 more letters arrived, complaining about the noise of my cattle, the dust from my gravel road, and the paint color on my barn. 2 weeks into their little campaign, I had 7 of those bogus violation letters tucked away in my folder. None of them held any legal weight, but they were designed to build a false paper trail to make me look like a nuisance. Then Tammy tried a different tactic, calling the Gillespie County Code Enforcement Office to complain about livestock odor. An inspector drove out, a patient guy in khaki pants who spent 45 minutes walking my acreage and checking the cattle pens. He found absolutely nothing wrong. Before leaving, he quietly admitted to me that it was the 3rd time she had called them out to this road, and that they all knew exactly what she was trying to do. I thanked the inspector, carefully documented the date and time of his visit, and slipped the report into my growing file. Looking back, here is a key legal detail that you and I can both appreciate. If you are operating a legitimate agricultural business in Texas, whether it is raising cattle or keeping bees, you are protected by the Texas Right to Farm Act. This law was passed specifically because developers kept building subdivisions next to working ranches and then complaining about the smells. Tammy was filing complaints that our state legislature had already made legally toothless, but I kept quiet and let her keep digging her hole. That week, the purple bluebonnets were blooming thick along my south fence line, their sweet scent mixing with dry cedar and the warmth of the ranch. From just over the ridge, the whining sound of circular saws echoed as Garrett's crew framed more houses for the next phase of Stone Ridge. More rooftops meant more homeowners association dues and more perceived power for Tammy. I stood at my fence, watching the construction dust drift, knowing she believed she could bully a retired federal investigator off his own land, just because she had succeeded 3 times before. At 6:30 one morning, while feeding my cattle, the slow crunch of tires on my gravel driveway caught my attention. I set down my feed bucket, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked out toward the front gate. On the other side, a Gillespie County Sheriff's Patrol car sat idling. The driver's door swung open, and out stepped Deputy Wade Bridwell. He was a big man, about 6 feet 2 inches tall and easily 220 pounds, sporting a crew cut and dark aviator sunglasses despite the early hour. Loaded down with his duty belt, sidearm, radio, and cuffs, he swaggered over like he owned the entire county. When I offered a polite morning greeting, he ignored it completely, demanding access to my land for a security inspection. When I asked if his sister had sent him, his jaw clenched as he barked that this was official business. I leaned back against the cold metal gatepost, crossing my arms, and asked if he had a warrant. He scoffed, claiming he did not need one for a public safety check, to which I flatly told him that he absolutely did. He slipped off his sunglasses, revealing furious pale blue eyes, and threatened that he could get a warrant and would not be polite when he returned. I simply told him to go get one, and that I would be waiting. He glared at me for 10 long seconds before delivering that tired line about making things real difficult for me. I looked him dead in the eye and told him I had heard that line many times before, usually from the criminals I ended up arresting. That finally made him pause. Looking back on it now, what I saw on his face first was not fear, but sheer confusion. It was the exact look someone gets when they run into resistance they were never briefed on. Wade Bridwell put his sunglasses back on, pulled out his phone, and started taking photos of everything. My gate, the fence, my truck, and my license plate. Then he got back into his patrol car and drove off without saying a word. I stood there listening to the gravel crunch under his tires and his radio crackling through the open window until he cleared the hill. 2 days later, a letter arrived on Gillespie County Sheriff's Office letterhead, but it was a total sham. No case number, no official stamp, no law cited, just a demand for a spare key to my gate under the guise of public safety. Looking back, there was no mistaking the signature at the bottom of that page. It was W.D.E. Bridwell's scribble, clear as day, and absolutely nobody else's. Having spent 22 years of my life reading fraudulent documents for the Bureau, I knew exactly what a legitimate law enforcement notice looked like, and this cheap imitation definitely was not one of them. This was a man using his department's official letterhead to manufacture authority he simply did not possess. In federal terms, we called that acting under color of law, abusing the appearance of government power to strip a citizen of their constitutional rights. It was a serious felony, the exact kind of case I used to build. Instead of calling Wade directly, I drafted a certified letter to his boss, the Gillespie County Sheriff, with a simple question. Did your office authorize this? It took only 4 days for the sheriff's office to send back a single-sentence response. They wrote quite plainly that their office did not authorize that correspondence. Right away, I made photocopies of everything. The fake notice, the sheriff's written denial, WDE's photographs of my property, and the gate camera timestamp showing his patrol car idling outside for exactly 11 minutes. All of it went straight into the Bridwell folder, which had grown to take up half a drawer in my filing cabinet. Under the kitchen light, I stared at WDE's pale blue signature, written with a cheap ballpoint pen. I thought about how many careers I had watched crumble over a single signature on a piece of paper that never should have existed. Wade did not know it yet, but he had just handed me the second piece of a federal case. The trail camera captured the intrusion at 3:12 in the morning. 2 figures, dressed in dark clothing, slipped through the shadows, one carrying bolt cutters and the other wire snips. They worked fast, pulling down 40 feet of steel ranch fencing in under 6 minutes. The infrared footage was grainy, but clear enough to show details. Clear enough to see their boots, and clear enough to spot the logo on the left boot of the taller man, a small yellow B inside a circle, the mark of Bridwell development. By the time I woke at 5 to walk the fence line, 14 head of cattle were scattered across the county road. One calf, a 3-month-old Hereford I had not named yet, lay dead in the drainage ditch, hit by a delivery truck. I found the driver sitting on his bumper with his head in his hands. The driver had already called 911 by the time I reached him. I spent 4 hours rounding up cattle in the oppressive July heat, sweat soaking through my shirt while pale dust rose off the Keechee Road every time a cow shifted direction. Hank Kohler drove over in his flatbed to help me patch the fence with temporary wire, his arthritic hands working the pliers as he muttered curses under his breath. That afternoon, Animal Control called. Someone had reported loose livestock endangering public safety, and I did not have to guess who. The officer was apologetic but firm, issuing a citation of $1,200 for livestock on a public road. I appealed it immediately, taking my trail camera footage and its clear timestamp straight to the county magistrate. The magistrate took one look at the bolt cutters and the severed wire. He studied the footage, looked up at me, and dismissed the entire fine in under 4 minutes. But even with the ticket gone, that calf was still dead. Later, I stood over the quiet spot where I had buried it, right next to the fence line where Hank and I had just strung the fresh wire. The turned dirt was still dark and loose. My wife, Elaine, would have named that calf by now. She named everything on my grandfather's ranch, the barn cats, the mockingbird above the porch, even the stubborn gate that stuck every winter. She would have called this one something gentle that made me roll my eyes and smile. That evening, Hank came back with a 6-pack of Shinerbach and sat on his tailgate near the damaged fence. Night crickets filled the darkness, while my trail camera's infrared light blinked red, like a steady heartbeat. Hank cracked a beer and told me this was the exact same thing they did to the Petersons. They cut their fence on a Saturday night, cattle got loose, and the county cited them. 2 weeks later, Garrett called with an offer. Then came the Crawfords. Worse, Wade pulled their teenage son over 3 times in a single month with no tickets, just making him sit on the curb while he ran his plates. The kid was so scared he would not drive anymore. They sold the ranch by Christmas. Then there was Dutch Meyer. Hank took a long drink, adding that Dutch was 78 when Wade showed up to tell him the county was going to condemn his barn for structural violations. In reality, there were no violations on Dutch's barn. Since the old man did not have a lawyer, he signed Garrett's contract the next week and died just 6 months later. Hank paused, telling me he always believed the sheer stress was what killed him. After Hank left, I went back inside and pulled up the trail camera footage on my laptop. I zoomed in on the boot with the Bridwell Development logo, took a screenshot, and added the printout to the folder. Then I focused on the second figure. He was shorter and thicker, moving with the confidence of someone who had done this before. He never showed his face to the camera, but his movements, checking the road, positioning himself, watching for headlights, revealed trained behavior. That was someone who understood patrol. I could not prove it from that footage alone, but I had spent 2 decades reading body language and analyzing surveillance video. The second man moved exactly like a cop. I closed the laptop and looked at the Bridwell folder, now 2 inches thick. Inside were the violation letters, the fake sheriff's notice, the denial, the trail camera footage, the dismissed citation, Hank's testimony, and the boot logo. 3 families had been driven off their land by these people. A man had died, a calf was buried 50 feet from my back fence, and a deputy sheriff was using his badge like a crowbar. I grabbed my phone and scrolled to a number I had not called in 2 years. Lorraine Pewitt answered on the second ring, saying, "Cole Tanner, I heard you retired to a ranch." I told her that I did, but now I had a public corruption case sitting right on my kitchen table. Lorraine had been my partner at the San Antonio field office for 6 years. She was sharp, relentless, and understood color of law cases better than anyone I had ever worked with. I gave her the short version of the story, detailing Tammy, Wade, Garrett, the 3 families, the fence cutting, and those fake notices. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she told me to send her everything. I did, but I also started digging on my own. County property records are public in Texas. You simply walk into the clerk's office, fill out a request form, and they hand over the deeds, transfer documents, closing prices, and everything else. I spent 2 full days in the Gillespie County Courthouse, pulling records on Garrett Bridwell's purchases from the last 5 years. The pattern was surgical. The Peterson Ranch, 112 acres, sold to Bridwell for $310,000, though it was worth $520,000. Before that, they faced 14 code complaints in 8 months, with Wade's patrol car logged on their road 19 times. The Crawford Place, 68 acres, sold for $240,000 instead of its $410,000 value, following 9 complaints and 7 visits from Wade. Their son was stopped 3 times in 1 month with 0 citations issued. Finally, Dutch Myers Ranch, 94 acres to the west, met a similar fate. Dutch's ranch sold for just $280,000, despite a market value of over $500,000. He had faced 11 complaints, and Wade visited him personally 4 times. The structural condemnation Wade threatened was never filed because it did not exist. Sitting at the kitchen table with the record spread under the yellow light, with Elaine's photograph on the shelf behind me, I saw what this was. It was not some neighborhood dispute or an overzealous homeowner association. This was a highly coordinated criminal land acquisition scheme. Tammy filed complaints to create paper trails. Wade used his badge to intimidate victims with threats. And when the target was completely exhausted and terrified, Garrett swooped in with a cheap lowball offer. 3 families and 3 ranches, representing a combined market value of nearly $1.5 million, were purchased for under $850,000. In federal law, what Wade was doing had a specific name: deprivation of rights under color of law. Under Title 18, United States Code Section 242, anyone acting under authority of law who willfully deprives a citizen of their constitutional rights faces federal prosecution and up to 10 years in prison. Wade had used his badge, his uniform, his patrol car, and his department's letterhead to threaten, harass, and coerce landowners into selling their property. That is not just bad policing. That is a federal crime. And Tammy and Garrett were absolutely not innocent bystanders. Looking back, that was the exact moment everything shifted. They were co-conspirators, plain and simple. The complaints, the insulting lowball offers, the flawless timing. It all fit the legal definitions of wire fraud and conspiracy. I sat back in my chair, listening to the old ranch house settle. The refrigerator hummed, and a moth tapped against the window screen. Elaine's photograph caught the lamplight. She was laughing, hair blowing sideways in this very kitchen 10 years ago. For the first time since she died, the old machinery inside me started turning. Not anger, not grief, but pure purpose. 3 families had lost their land because nobody with the right skills stood in the way. Now, someone was. I picked up my phone and called Lorraine. "I have the full pattern," I said. 3 properties, under market sales, badge intimidation, and wire communications. It was textbook. Lorraine was quiet on the other end for a moment before telling me I had enough to open a preliminary investigation. She warned me to keep building the case and not to tip them off. I lived a double life that summer. By day, I was Cole Tanner, the simple rancher mending fences, feeding cattle, and hauling hay in the brutal August heat, while sweat soaked the leather band of my hat. I waved at Tammy in her Escalade and nodded at Wade when his patrol car crawled by. I looked like a beaten man who accepted his place. But at night, I was someone else. First, I upgraded my surveillance. Trail cameras are fine for catching coyotes, but federal evidence requires higher standards. I bought 4 weatherproof cameras, the rugged kind deer hunters mount on tree stands, and positioned them to cover every approach to my ranch. 2 watched the front gate, 1 guarded the south fence line where they had cut through before, and 1 overlooked the barn. Each unit was motion activated, time-stamped, and stored footage on encrypted secure digital cards. I mounted them inside hollow cedar fence posts and painted the housings to match the weathered wood. You would have to know exactly where to look to find them. The second thing I did was start recording my phone calls. Texas is a one-party consent state. That means as long as one person in the conversation, in this case me, consents to the recording, it is completely legal. No warrant or notification is required. After testing a recording app on my phone, I made sure every call from Tammy, Wade, or Garrett was captured. If you and I lived in a state like California or Florida, both parties would have to agree to be recorded. But here in Texas, one-party consent is all it takes. That small legal distinction has decided more cases than most people realize. The third step was much harder. I drove to Kerrville and sat in a diner with Roy Peterson, the first rancher who sold to Garrett. Roy was 63, sunburned, and quiet. He ordered black coffee and did not touch it for 20 minutes, while explaining how Wade came out 5 times. Wade never wrote a ticket or filed a report. He just stood in the driveway and talked about how things could go sideways if Roy did not cooperate. Roy told me Wade claimed the county was investigating his water well, hinting at contamination. There was none. Roy had the water tested 3 times. He stared at the table, admitting his wife could not sleep. She would hear a car on the road at night and freeze. When Garrett called with the offer, she begged Roy to sign before they could even think. Later, I tracked down Martha Crawford at a rental house in Johnson City. Her story was identical. Wade pulled over her 17-year-old son, while Tammy filed relentless complaints about their livestock. Then Garrett arrived with a contract and a smile, claiming he was doing them a favor because the property would lose all its value anyway. Meanwhile, Dutchmeyer's daughter Phyllis was living in Austin, and her story was just as bad. Phyllis cried on the phone when we spoke. Her 78-year-old father truly believed the county was going to condemn his barn, never realizing Wade had manufactured the entire threat. I typed out every single word: dates, names, badge numbers, and specific threats. 3 families, 3 identical patterns of extortion. When Lorraine reviewed the statements, she confirmed the evidence was solid and opened a formal case. The FBI San Antonio field office assigned Lorraine and a younger agent named Tate Morrison to the investigation. They began pulling Wade's patrol logs, Tammy's homeowners association financial records, and Garrett's property transactions, while subpoenas went out for phone and email records. Meanwhile, I prepared for the endgame, which centered around the annual meeting. Tammy ran that meeting every single year with absolute authority, mandatory attendance, strict rules, and tightly controlled agendas. Hank warned me she used these gatherings to announce new initiatives and remind the homeowners who was in charge. When Lorraine and I discussed it, she pointed out that if Wade showed up in uniform and made official statements about enforcement, it would establish color of law on the record in front of 90 witnesses. I assured her he would be there, as Tammy loved the intimidating optics of having him by her side. Lorraine decided to place 2 agents in the back of the room acting as new residents. If Wade acted under badge authority, they would execute the federal warrants right then and there. I hung up and walked out to the barn. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the hay bales. I ran my hand along the rough cedar post where I had hidden the south camera. The wood was still warm from the afternoon heat, and the air smelled of sweet hay mixed with the mineral tang of dry limestone dust. For the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of calm. Not the hollow calm of grief, but the cold, operational calm of a plan coming together. Wade returned on a Thursday. This time he brought paper. He stood at my gate holding a single sheet of Sheriff's Department letterhead with the words, "Order of Inspection," printed in bold across the top. He waved it like a real subpoena, but even from 10 feet away, I could tell it had the exact same fatal flaws as his last attempt. There was no case number, no judge's signature, and no court stamp. It just had Wade's name at the bottom of a paragraph, demanding access to all structures, equipment, and livestock enclosures on my land. He warned me this was my last chance, threatening to return with a tow truck for my machinery and an obstruction citation. I looked at the fake paper, looked him in the eye, and unlocked the gate. He blinked, completely caught off guard. "Come on in," I said. "Walk wherever you want." He hesitated, showing the brief confusion of a bully who rehearsed a fight but not compliance. He stepped through, and I followed 10 steps behind with my hands in my pockets, watching him take photos of my tractor, my hay rake, and my cattle chute. He opened the barn door without asking, poking at my fence posts and checking the water troughs. Gesturing toward my tractor, he claimed all of it might need to be seized for safety reasons. Keeping my voice neutral, I asked him if this was an official investigation. He turned, the low sun behind him casting a long shadow across the dusty barn floor. "This is whatever I say it is," he sneered. 5 words. 5 words that would make Lorraine smile, because every second of this encounter was being recorded. The hidden cameras were capturing high-definition video and audio, while the phone in my shirt pocket recorded our conversation in real time. He had no idea he was handing us his badge on a silver platter. Wade's handwritten order of inspection was as fraudulent as a $3 bill. His threats to seize my equipment had no legal basis, and his arrogant statement was the exact kind of line federal prosecutors love to play for a jury on a loop. Once he drove away, I immediately sent the footage to Lorraine. Her text came back just 12 minutes later, confirming we had color of law on camera and clear probable cause. She was moving the file directly to the United States Attorney. The case was no longer preliminary. It was a full federal investigation. 3 days later, Tammy launched her next offensive, circulating a safety petition through the neighborhood to address blight on adjacent properties. 80 households received a copy of that petition, and 62 signed it. Most of those people had never stepped foot on my ranch, smelled my cattle, or seen my fences up close. They signed simply because Tammy told them to, and because standing up to her was something nobody had successfully done in 8 years. She presented the document at the next county commissioner's court meeting. I sat in the back row, watching her speak for 7 minutes about property values and public safety. She never mentioned my name because every commissioner knew exactly which ranch she meant. They thanked her for her concern and tabled the petition for review. No action was taken, but Tammy still walked out of there like she had just won a major verdict. I walked out knowing that her petition, coordinated through official homeowners association emails and discussed in text messages between Tammy, Wade, and Garrett, was just another piece of our wire fraud case. Every electronic communication used to advance their scheme was a separate criminal count. The folder in my filing cabinet had grown into a heavy banker's box, and the FBI now possessed a copy of everything. That night, I sat on my porch and listened to the cattle settling in the north pasture. The stars over the Texas hill country looked thick and close, not like distant, polite city lights, but bright ranch stars, crowding the dark sky as if trying to get a better look at whatever was happening down below. Looking back on those quiet Texas nights, I remember watching the warm orange glow of the Stone Ridge streetlights, a subdivision wrapped in its own small certainties. As you and I know, peace is fragile, and in exactly 10 days, those certainties were going to shatter. The trouble started the following Monday when Tammy Bridwell went public. She uploaded a calculated 3-paragraph post to the local Facebook group titled, "Your Safety is My Priority." She painted my ranch as a dangerous livestock operation, falsely claiming my cattle were constantly escaping onto public roads. She even claimed I was dodging police inspections and putting school kids at risk. Every word was a lie, but she wrote it to sound just plausible enough to deceive the neighborhood. Within 48 hours, that single Facebook post exploded with 97 comments. Tammy stayed active in the thread, personally replying to every single person to stoke the flames of panic, while thanking neighbors for standing up to protect the children. She even went as far as tagging the local news station 3 separate times to force their hand. Her little stunt worked. The very next afternoon, I received a call from Nina Stokes, a reporter over at the local newspaper. She wanted to know if I had any comment regarding the safety concerns raised by the homeowners association. I paused for just 2 seconds, thinking it through. I told her I would have a massive statement for her soon, but asked if she could hold the story for 10 days. She hesitated, but she could tell I wasn't just some guy trying to dodge a hard question. She told me she could give me exactly 1 week, and I knew that would be more than enough time to lay my trap. 2 days after that conversation, Garrett Bridwell called my personal line. His voice was smooth, practiced, and warm, the unmistakable tone of a slick developer who had closed hundreds of shady real estate deals without ever losing a single night of sleep. He wanted to buy me out, offering $420,000 in cash for my ranch, with a clean 30-day closing. He promised that if I signed, all the complaints, inspections, and headaches would instantly vanish. But the actual market value of my 86 acres in Gillespie County was closer to $780,000. He was offering barely half, so I kept my voice flat and told him it was generous. Garrett insisted it was a fair price, adding that it was a much better alternative to whatever might happen if his wife Tammy kept pushing her campaign against me. I let a heavy silence hang in the air, letting his threat echo in his own ears. He had just made that blatant connection on a recorded phone line, right here in a one-party consent state. It wasn't just aggressive salesmanship, it was outright extortion, and he had handed it to me on a silver platter. After telling him I would think about it, I hung up. I sat in my dark kitchen with only the glow of my laptop screen, playing the recording twice. Outside, my cattle were entirely peaceful under the night sky, and the scent of freshly sanded cedar planks from my morning chores still lingered in the quiet house. To my ears, Garrett's smooth, oily voice sounded utterly confident, betraying absolutely no awareness that he had just committed a serious federal crime on tape. I quickly emailed the audio file to my former colleague Lorraine, adding a single sentence. He said the quiet part out loud. Her confirmation arrived within 20 minutes, stating that the conspiracy charge was solid, and the United States Attorney was already reviewing the warrants that very night. We had exactly 5 days until the annual Homeowners Association meeting. Lorraine called later to outline our operational plan. 2 undercover agents would attend the meeting pretending to be new residents. If Wade used his badge to threaten me there, we would execute the warrants immediately. If not, they would arrest them at home the next morning. When Lorraine asked if I would be all right facing them, I simply smiled. I told her I had spent my career sitting across from corrupt politicians who thought they were untouchable, so I could easily handle a petty homeowners association president and her brother. Over the next 4 days, I focused on physical ranch work. I mended the fence section they had cut, moved the herd to the north pasture, and replaced a cracked water trough. It was patient labor that kept my hands busy while my mind ran endless calculations. On the morning of the meeting, I put on a clean shirt, stepped into my good boots, and clipped my retired federal credentials to my belt under my jacket. The shield felt heavier than I remembered, or perhaps it had just been a long time since I last carried it. Walking into the Stone Ridge Estates Community Center, I was greeted by the depressing mix of beige walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and the stale smell of floor wax. If you have ever stepped inside one of these neighborhood halls, you know the sterile atmosphere. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where Tammy Bridwell sat dead center, clutching a microphone with a bottle of water placed exactly 2 inches from her hand. 90 residents filed in, whispering as Tammy shuffled her papers like a queen holding court. Her husband Garrett sat in the front row in developer casual loafers, staring at his phone. Meanwhile, Deputy Wade Bridwell stood by the side door in full uniform, his hand resting conspicuously on his hip near his service weapon. Wade paced the room, scanning the crowd with the deliberate, slow gaze of a small-town deputy who desperately wanted everyone to notice his gun. I kept a low profile in the very back row. 2 seats to my left, Agent Lorraine Pewitt was casually flipping through a copy of the agenda, while Agent Tate Morrison sat 3 rows ahead near the center aisle. Both of them wore civilian clothes, blending in perfectly as new homeowners interested in boring neighborhood rules. Tammy wasted no time, calling the meeting to order at 7 o'clock sharp. She breezed through the first 3 agenda items regarding pool maintenance and trash cans, the exact kind of tedious homeowners association business that makes everyone zone out and check their phones. My attention sharpened when she finally reached the 4th item on the agenda, which she announced as the Community Security Enhancement Initiative. Tammy sat up straight, addressing the crowd. She spoke into the microphone, claiming they had an ongoing issue with a neighbor who consistently refused to comply with basic standards. She paused dramatically to take a slow sip of water before listing her grievances. She claimed my ranching operation caused animals to escape onto roads, created foul odors, and put school children at risk. She told the room she had tried to resolve things directly and filed multiple official complaints, but that I had stubbornly rejected every single one of her reasonable requests. With a calculated look, Tammy turned toward the side door and nodded for her brother to take over, introducing him as Deputy Bridwell. Wade pushed off the wall and marched to the front of the room. Hooking his thumbs into his heavy-duty belt, he addressed the crowd, declaring that as a law enforcement officer, he was prepared to enforce compliance. He labeled my ranch a public safety concern and threatened that if I did not cooperate, he would use his official power to seize my keys and equipment. He had just committed extortion on the record in front of 90 witnesses. I slowly stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the tile, a sharp sound that instantly cut through the murmurs like a knife. Every head in the community center turned toward me, and Tammy's smug smile instantly froze on her face. Wade's hand drifted an inch closer to his duty belt. I asked him calmly, my voice carrying across the silent room, if he was speaking in his official capacity as a Gillespie County Deputy Sheriff. Wade puffed out his chest and barked that he damn well was. I told him that was perfect, as I needed that on the record. I reached inside my jacket, pulled out my federal credentials, and flipped them open for the front rows to see my gold shield. I announced my name as Cole Tanner, retired special agent of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, having spent 22 years with the Public Corruption Unit, arresting officers who abused their power for profit. An absolute, suffocating silence immediately fell over the room as my words sank in. It wasn't just quiet. The air felt completely still, and the hum of the overhead lights suddenly sounded deafening. Wade's expression shifted as the color drained from his face and neck like someone had pulled a plug. His mouth hung open, but he was speechless, his hand falling away from his belt. That was when Agent Pruitt and Agent Morrison stood up, flashing their federal badges. Lorraine walked forward with the calm authority of an investigator who had done this 200 times, placing Deputy Wade Bridwell under arrest for deprivation of rights, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The sharp click of the handcuffs echoed clearly in the quiet room. In the midst of the shock, Wade's radio squawked loudly, and someone in the 3rd row dropped a water bottle that bounced twice on the hard tile floor. Tammy bolted upright, screaming that they couldn't do this in her meeting and begging her brother to intervene. But Agent Morrison stepped forward, calmly presenting a federal warrant for her arrest on charges of conspiracy, wire fraud, and aiding deprivation of rights. Her husband, Garrett, sat frozen in the front row, his face completely gray and his hands flat on his knees as he realized his world was collapsing. Looking back, that was the sweet taste of justice. You and I know that bullies always crumble under the light, and sitting in the 2nd row, reporter Nina Stokes captured every second on her phone. She had truly earned her story. I watched Tammy as they led her around the table. Her blazer was crooked, and her Gucci sunglasses lay on the floor near the microphone stand. "You spent 8 years taking people's land," I whispered, just loud enough for her to hear. "Tonight, you lose everything." She did not answer. For the first time in 8 years, Tammy Bridwell had nothing to say. The federal indictments came down 3 weeks later. Wade Bridwell was charged with 4 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law, 6 counts of wire fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy. He was fired from the sheriff's office that same day. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea, but the prosecutors had our recordings, the camera footage, the fake notices, and the testimony of those 3 families. Looking back, the federal justice system moved with a cold precision they never saw coming. Wade was suddenly staring down 12 to 15 years. Tammy Bridwell was hit with conspiracy, wire fraud, and aiding in the deprivation of constitutional rights. Her attorney filed a motion to dismiss, painting her as a concerned community volunteer, but the judge denied it in a single blunt paragraph. She was facing 8 to 10 years. Her brother Garrett, charged with extortion, wire fraud, and conspiracy, watched his case crumble when they played his recorded threats at his arraignment. Even his own lawyer winced. Garrett was ordered to pay full market value restitution to all three families, with the final total exceeding $900,000. 2 weeks after the federal agents made their arrests, the Stone Ridge Estates Homeowners Association held an emergency election. For the first time in 8 long years, my neighbors actually got to cast their ballots without Tammy hovering over them with her clipboard. We ended up electing Dorothy Cahill, a retired school teacher, as our new president. Dorothy immediately cut the association dues by 40%. After that, she took the time to write a personal, handwritten apology to every single family living along our road, including me. I remember going down to the fence line to share the news with Hank Kohler. He was leaning against his truck in the exact spot where he had originally warned me about Tammy. Hank listened in absolute silence, took off his hat, stared up at the Texas sky, and whispered that Dutch Meyer deserved to hear that. I used a portion of my settlement funds to establish the Tanner Legal Defense Fund, based right out of Fredericksburg. Our mission was simple: to provide free legal consultations to small landowners, ranchers, and farmers facing developer intimidation, eminent domain abuse, or HOA overreach. Hank Kohler signed on as our first advisory board member, and Roy Peterson was quick to become the second. When Nina Stokes published the full story in the Fredericksburg Standard Radio Post, it immediately gained traction, getting picked up by the San Antonio Express News and 2 Austin stations. Even Tammy's old petition, signed by 162 residents, became key evidence of their public harassment campaign. More than a dozen of those signees called me to apologize. I told them all the same thing: you didn't know then, but you do now. The morning after that story was published, I walked up to the highest ridge on the ranch to clear my head. The Texas hill country stretched out endlessly below me, a beautiful expanse of limestone, rugged live oaks, dry creek beds, and open pasture. In the north section, my cattle grazed quietly, their reddish-brown bodies moving in slow motion against the green. The sky was a wide, brilliant blue, the specific shade you only see in central Texas come September, when the summer heat finally breaks and the light turns soft. Standing there, I thought about Elaine. I didn't think about the hospital bed. I thought about the ranch version of her, the woman who stood on this exact ridge 12 years ago, pointed toward the horizon, and told me that if I ever left the bureau, this is where I belonged. She was right. She was always right about what mattered. I am still on the ranch, and the fence is completely new. Every single foot of it has been replaced with heavy, welded steel pipe that nobody is going to slice through with bolt cutters. The cattle are thriving out here. Even the bees did their part, producing 47 jars of rich honey this past season, and every single jar sold out at the Fredericksburg market by 10 in the morning. If you have ever dealt with a power-tripping HOA president who thought she was untouchable, a greedy developer trying to bully you off your own land, or a crooked cop using a badge to steal what is yours, I want to hear your story in the comments. People like the Bridwells always count on your silence. They rely on good folks giving up because the fight feels too overwhelming. But it never is. You just need the right folder. And if you want to see what happens when a Karen calls the fire marshal on a guy who literally builds fire trucks, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next video, but first, let me share what really sticks with me about this entire case. Tammy Bridwell ran her scheme for 8 years. For 8 years, she filed bogus complaints, sent her uniformed brother to intimidate people, and watched innocent families pack up their lives and leave. 8 years, and nobody ever pushed back. The reality is, she wasn't brilliant or some kind of criminal mastermind. She was just incredibly persistent, and she had a brother with a badge who was willing to do whatever she asked. That is exactly how petty power operates. It doesn't have to be smart. It just requires everyone else to be too exhausted or too terrified to fight back. I wasn't any smarter than Tammy. I was just trained. I knew exactly what a heavy, undeniable case file looked like. I understood what a professional investigation required. And above all, I knew that people like them can never resist saying the quiet part out loud when they think no one is keeping score. They truly believe the law is whatever they say it is. But the real lesson of this federal case isn't about having an FBI badge or official status. It is entirely about having the patience to document everything. Every letter I saved, every single transaction I recorded, and every camera feed I set up, that is what built the case. You don't need a badge to do that. You just need a folder, a phone, and the patience to let bad actors dig their own graves. If you have ever had someone abuse their authority and haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Because next week we have an incredible story about a Karen calling the fire marshal on a man who builds fire trucks for a living.